partners that we have. But I won't take up too much of your time because I know firsthand how wonderful Rebound are, and I know that we're excited to hear more from them as well. So we have 5 programs at United Ministries. We try to work together as best we can to serve our participants and serve our community. The first organization or program that we have is called Emergency Assistance. So that provides support with rent, utilities, life-sustaining medications, and a food pantry as well. So some immediate crisis. We also have our Place of Hope, which is a day shelter for folks who are experiencing homelessness. So nobody stays there overnight, but they can come in during the day to access restrooms, telephone, shower, laundry, and can also receive case management services. So help getting into shelter or housing of their own, assistance with IDs that have been lost, assistance with benefits, that kind of thing. So those are our more immediate crisis service programs. We then have 3 other programs that are focused more on mitigating crisis and moving from crisis to stability or from stability to thriving. So we have our adult education program, which helps folks to study for their GED. It's different from other programs in town because it is a drop-in tutoring model, so it's self-paced. It's that one-on-one attention, and folks are able to fit it more into their schedule, so they don't have to come to the same set days and class times. We also have the only shelter in the county for families that are experiencing homelessness. That's our housing program. We are able to keep families together in those houses rather than splitting them apart into a men's and women's shelter. So that's a great resource for families with minor children that are experiencing homelessness. And then the program that I manage is the Striving to Thrive program, which is a long-term holistic coaching program for folks who are working towards goals related to economic mobility. So that can be a whole wide variety of things, right? That could be housing, transportation, childcare, physical and mental health, income, employment. So we really cover all of those topics. We have a lot of knowledge and information in a lot of those topics, but the main focus is really coaching individuals on taking the steps that they know they want to take to get to the goals that they want to achieve. So we provide some knowledge and resources and support in-house, and we also connect to all kinds of partners in the community to fill gaps that we might not be able to cover, including root and rebound when folks are experiencing any barriers around criminal backgrounds. But we also focus on financial coaching very specifically. That's something that all of our coaches are trained in, is financial coaching. So we're helping folks to plan for and achieve goals, kind of break those down into very actionable steps, and then are providing some financial coaching and resources as well to bolster their financial health, so things like credit, savings. And so there are a couple of extra benefits in addition to being able to work with a coach. We do have match savings plans where we match dollar for dollar or 2 to 1 what folks are saving for as emergencies or asset building. We also have some financial stabilization funds if someone experiences an emergency while they're in our program. We support folks with digital literacy. We provide free mental health counseling. So there are lots of added benefits in addition to being able to work with a long-term coach on economic mobility goals. There's information about all 5 of those programs on this flyer that I'm going to leave near the back, including how to connect any of your clients with these services. You can also feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and I'm happy to also take any questions now. Awesome. Again, my name's Lee Barton. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It is so good to see all of you. I am Kate Weaver Patterson. I am the Deputy Director for National Programs for Root and Rebound, which is a very long way of saying that I have the opportunity to oversee our South Carolina office, which is here, which we're going to talk more about, as well as some of our national litigation and policy work. But I am from Greenville. So much from Greenville that my dad is in the audience, and it's so nice to see so many familiar faces here today and talk about a topic that is very near and dear to our hearts. So thank you, Jennifer, for having us, Lee for coming in and doing the United Ministries presentation. We work with United Ministries all the time, and so we were really thrilled to be able to have them as the agency spotlight today. I am joined today by Allison Elder, who is here in the front row, who is one of our amazing attorneys at Root and Rebound. Do you want to do a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure.
Before we dive in.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Elder. I started with Root and Rebound as an Equal Justice Works Fellow in 2020 and have transitioned into a staff attorney role. My work as an EJW was really focused on removing barriers to family reunification for parents who are incarcerated or previously incarcerated. And my first ever legal job was working with incarcerated mothers. I have a deep passion for that work.
So we are thrilled to be here. Allison is she started with us as an EJW fellow, and to come on as a full-time attorney really shows the growth that we've been able to have. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Root and Rebound and who we are. Just a brief note on my background. Like I said, I am from Greenville. I was at the solicitor's office for about 5 years, in addition to doing corporate law, which was my favorite, and clerking with some people like Malia. I followed her into a clerkship. So, you know, I have done a variety of different things, but I was a child abuse prosecutor at the solicitor's office. And that was a wonderful experience, but really allowed me to see some of the systemic injustices that we have in our criminal legal system. Incredibly frustrating, and if they're frustrating for me, a white woman of privilege who's never experienced the criminal legal system in the capacity of being arrested, being offended, certainly the impact that it has on the folks who are walking through that, disproportionately people of color and people of lower socioeconomic status. As I thought about a lot of those things, Root and Rebound, which is the organization that Allison and I work for, was looking to expand. So Root and Rebound's mission is to support people navigating reentry and reduce the harms perpetuated by mass incarceration. What does that mean, and why do we need it? So Root and Rebound started in 2013 in California with this idea that folks go through the criminal legal system and come out, and a lot of times people who haven't been impacted by the system think they come out and they move on with their lives. But the reality is the legal barriers that persist and in fact are born out of the reentry process and having a criminal record often leave folks without many options. Many of those barriers are legal, and oftentimes our civil legal aid, as it has historically been set up, has not had the capacity to handle those very specific reentry issues. So we think of ourselves as filling the gap between where people leave from a public defender, oftentimes, or appointed counsel, and civil legal services, the gap that needs to be filled with parole and probation questions that come up, with record cleaning, with housing and employment and family issues that are very specifically related to someone's criminal record, is where Root and Rebound comes in. So we started in 2013 in California. Every state in the union, I think, could use Root and Rebound or equivalent because, as we're going to talk about, 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. If you look to your left and your right, right now, statistically, one of you should have a record. So these issues permeate our society, they permeate our families, and oftentimes there aren't the resources available to help folks. So we are hitting our 10-year anniversary this year, but we started in South Carolina in 2019. We have expanded to, at first it was just me, but now we are lucky enough to have 5 attorneys and paralegal, 2 AmeriCorps Vistas, and we work statewide. So statewide issues that come up as a result of reentry or someone's current incarceration. So why is this needed? We talked a little bit about this in terms of how common a criminal record is. But mass incarceration and criminal records, which impact about 1 in 3 Americans, are critical racial justice and economic justice issues. We must acknowledge that and how those issues impact systems like family court and mediation. So I know that some of you, this may be very basic information. I see Cass here in the front. I know that many of you practice in criminal law, but for those of you who don't, just a very brief overview. What does it mean to have a criminal record? So the way that this will typically work, someone is arrested. They are charged with a felony or misdemeanor. Best way to think about that, felonies are typically your more serious crimes. Oftentimes the federal definition is they can carry more than a year in prison. There's some exceptions to that, but murder is a felony, public disorderly conduct is a misdemeanor. So you are charged with one of those. You navigate the court system. For our clients, the folks we typically see at Rebound, for in fact, most of the people who are walking through the criminal legal system, they are going to be eligible for a public defender or appointed counsel. Almost all criminal cases are resolved in a plea. We could do a whole separate CLE on why that is, and whether or not that's a good thing. It is and it isn't, but oftentimes we do have people who take a plea to a lesser charge. They go in front of a judge and they are sentenced. Folks can be sentenced to a period of incarceration, which means that they would go to the South Carolina Department of Corrections. If the sentence is over 90 days, they can be sentenced to probation, which means that they will experience some sort of monitoring for a period of time. Or they can be sentenced to some sort of fine or time served, where they have to pay a certain amount of money, or they have been in jail for a certain period of time. And the court says that is sufficient for what you did in terms of the punishment that you need to receive. So most folks, you've watched enough Law and Order, right? Or you practice in this area, and that is familiar. Where Allison and Annie, who was our education resource coordinator, who's sitting up here as well, where we come in is often what happens then with this criminal record. People think you get out and you move forward. And unfortunately, what we sometimes call collateral consequences, perpetual punishment, a record follows someone for the rest of their life. And oftentimes a record will not just include convictions, it will include when people were arrested. Even it will include charges that were dismissed that may or may not be reflected on someone's record. So you can get a record that is 12 pages long and there are 3 or 4 actual convictions on there. But landlords don't understand that. Employers don't understand that. Most lawyers would not understand that unless you have really dived into what that looks like. And that record of activities follows people around and is a reason almost across the board, at least in our state, for people to be denied housing, employment, access to their families and things like that. So it continues to impact someone's financial stability, housing stability, family stability in ways that are hard for us to imagine if we haven't walked through that the way that our clients have. So just want to hit really briefly on what the numbers tell us. And when I say things like this is a racial justice issue, this is a socioeconomic issue, what that means and who this is impacting. So this is a slide. This is actually some of the most recent data that we have from 2022 from the Prison Policy Initiative. If you're ever looking for statistics on incarceration, Prison Policy Initiative and Sentencing Project are excellent, highly recommended. They send out reports with some regularity. It can be really difficult in states, particularly in South Carolina, to get reliable criminal legal data. SCDC, which is our state prison system, does a pretty decent job in that one area of putting out data. Each of our 46 counties has a separate jail. Getting data from those jails can be really difficult. And that's true across the board here. So the state prison number, is fairly reliable. Local jail numbers can fluctuate pretty significantly. What this adds up to is about 1.9 million people in the United States who are currently incarcerated. The good news is that's down from a level of about 2.2 million in 2018, 2019. So we are slowly trending in a positive direction. But as you will see from this slide, the United States incarcerates more people per capita than any other nation in the world. Our prison population has increased more than 500% in the last 40 years. And I anticipate that we would look at some of these countries, say Russia or China, and say that we like to think that we have a better human rights record than they do, and in many ways that would be true. But when we look at our incarceration rates, it should give us pause. We should be thinking, why is this so high, and is it an effective deterrent to crime? Allison and I would answer that no, and I think the stats would bear that out. That is, again, another CLE in and of itself that we can talk about, but our incarceration rates are incredibly high, which is an incredible economic cost, and there is an incredible community cost to that. Not only are our incarceration rates as a whole incredibly high, when you break down and look at who we are imprisoning, I hope that this gives you significant pause. About 1 in 9 men in the United States will be imprisoned in some way, shape, or form. That could be jail, that could be federal prison, that could be state prison over the course of their life. That breaks down to about 1 in 17 white men. It breaks down to 1 in 3 Black men. 1 in 6 Latino men. You can see with women, the racial disparities also track. There are far fewer women in our prison systems. Black women, however, are the fastest growing prison population. And something around 73–80% of women who are incarcerated are mothers. So when we talk about impact on family, and off what Allison and I and our colleague Anna, who are certified mediators through UMC and volunteers, when we are looking at, and we do the family court mediations, there is a deep family impact that comes with incarceration that Allison is going to talk a little bit more about. Just to distill this down a bit further and give you some South Carolina specifics. As of this morning, we have 15,862 people in prison in South Carolina. This, our 754 people number is pre-COVID. That has dropped a bit, but South Carolina still, when I showed you this slide, you can see that 655 number. South Carolina would be above the United States there. So South Carolina per capita is incarcerating more people than any other country in the world. We release between 8,000 to 10,000 people a year from SCDC. That does not include the number of people who are released from county jail. Sometimes people will think when we talk about the impact of incarceration, they think understandably about prison. But people who, if you think about it, if I'm arrested today and I am in jail for any period of time, that is going to have an impact on my 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and 1-year-old. If I'm working on the line at BMW, they're not gonna hold my job for me if I'm sitting in jail for 10 days. If I am not able to go to work for those 10 days and I don't make the money that I need, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent. So even a short period of incarceration that doesn't result in a conviction can have huge ripple effects on folks' lives. And that's why when we talk about the impact that it has on the family, or if you're mediating a case, you have a case as a family law attorney, and someone has a record, or someone has been in jail for just a few days, when they say that that has an impact on their financial security overall, they mean it. So our current parole population, folks being monitored, which is extremely expensive, both for the state and for the folks who are under monitoring, is about 40,000 people. We spend $630 million a year in South Carolina on corrections. Our ratio of Black to white prisoners in South Carolina, going back to the racial justice piece, is 4.3 to 1. 62% of our prisoners in South Carolina are Black, as opposed to our Black population being 27%. There is incredible systemic racism within our criminal legal system. That does not mean that everyone in the criminal legal system is racist. It means that the system itself is often set up to perpetuate systemic racism. When I used to give these presentations, I used to hedge that a little bit more and say that as I dive deeper and deeper into the numbers, and what I think we see every day, I don't think there's any other conclusion that you could draw that systemic racism is inherent in the system. I often will use the hypothetical example, and sometimes, and he's allowed me to do this when he's in the room, I particularly appreciate it, but Jerry Blatzengang is the CEO of Soteria Development Corporation, a dear friend and a partner. And oftentimes Jerry and I will stand up and give a presentation together. For those of you who don't know, Jerry is a formerly incarcerated Black man. And I will say, if I get pulled over on Augusta Road in my Black minivan with my chandelier earrings and my big sunglasses, people may assume certain things about me, but my experience in getting pulled over on Augusta Road is very likely to be different than Jerry's. My ability, if I am pulled over and I go to jail and my bond is set at $5,000, my ability to pay that and get out immediately is certain. I think if I called Dad from jail, he would come get me out. A lot of folks don't have that. And so we have people who are living in poverty and sitting in jail. We have cycles of poverty that continue because of the disruption of the incarceration system. We have entire communities and families who have often been decimated by the war on drugs, by the number of folks. I mean, you think if we have 1 in 3 Black men in this country who have been incarcerated at some point in their life, what a disruption that is to communities and to families, and the disproportionate impact that has. One of the things I always, it's not particular to this presentation and mediation, but I think it's so important for folks to know. In South Carolina, with a record, you are not permanently disenfranchised in terms of being able to vote. You can vote once you have completed your sentence. But in terms of our current disenfranchisement rates in South Carolina, when you look at this disproportionate amount in terms of the number of people currently disenfranchised and the number of folks in this state who are Black and disenfranchised, I should raise some questions. If you have other, if this has piqued your interest, and I hope it has, I cannot recommend enough the new Jim Crow, which is an incredible book by Michelle Alexander. I think I have her name right. Forgive me if I don't, but it's the new Jim Crow. Is a fascinating, discouraging, and phenomenal, well-researched overview of how systemic racism in our country has fed into our criminal legal system. So I want to end with this, and then I'm going to hand it over to Allison to talk about specifically why in family court cases and in mediation this is so important. Reentry permeates all aspects of someone's life. And so if you remember anything from this, I want you to remember and take away from this that our communities of color and our poor communities are disproportionately impacted by the criminal legal system, and that is going to go on throughout their lives to perpetuate generational poverty. When someone is released from SBDC, they are typically handed a bus ticket, and we tell them best of luck. Sometimes folks have been in for a decade or more. We have clients who come to us who don't know what iPhones are, have no computer skills. And so we give folks a bus ticket and we say, go, and then they can't find a job. They can't find a place to live because landlords and employers are going to run their criminal record. And we wonder why our recidivism rate is so high. I would do anything in the world to feed my children. And if that were selling drugs and I couldn't find a job and I needed to go back to selling drugs, I absolutely would. And so we can't not give folks options and not recognize the impact that this system has on people's lives, and then be surprised by the results when folks go back to what they've been doing. Listen, I'm not, and I don't want to, okay. I am not a Pollyanna who thinks that everyone in jail is there because they've done nothing wrong. At the solicitor's office, I dealt with people who are abusing children. So I am not here to tell you that people are not doing bad things and that we don't, as a community, a society, and a country, need to be thinking about how we deal with that. I am here to tell you that the way that we've dealt with it isn't working, and it has disproportionately impacted our marginalized communities. And the way that it isn't working is something that Allison and I see every day, both in terms of folks getting out, not feeling they have any options, going on parole and probation. As I said, that carries an enormous amount of fees that folks often have trouble paying. Failure to pay your fees. Allison's going to talk about failure to pay your child support because you can't get a job, can result in suspension of your driver's license. And so then you definitely can't get a job because you can't drive. And I've gone before judges, and Cass has probably had this experience where they'll say, well, just take an Uber. I don't know if y'all have taken an Uber around Greenville lately, but it is not cheap. And so if you're trying to take an Uber from downtown Greenville somewhere to the BMW plant, $60 a day, maybe that is not the way that we need to, that is not the solution to this problem. So these things domino, and with every barrier that comes up, an inability to get, so if you have a drug felony on your record in South Carolina, we are the only state where you cannot get SNAP benefits. So 20-year-old drug felony, you cannot get SNAP benefits to feed your family. So these things perpetuate, they build, and the barriers to folks can seem insurmountable. And so if you can understand what some of these issues are, as Jennifer said, we do have information on a lot of these things on our website, a lot of resources that are available. We're always happy to talk about folks. But if you can understand how some of these issues become intertwined and interconnected, we hope that it will allow you to go into some of your cases, to some of your mediations, and have a better sense of why people may be in the situation that they're in. So with that, I will turn it over to Allison.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Allison Elder, and I want to give an additional plug to United Ministries, who started today's CLE and is just a wonderful ally and partner to us. We share clients and share our work, and honestly could not do our work without the fantastic social service providers in Greenville County. I want to start by reading something that was adopted by San Francisco in 2003. So 20 years ago now, they were already thinking about parental incarceration and the impact on children. It was based on research and work that community organizations did with children and families experiencing parental incarceration to figure out, what can we do as a community, as a city, to support those families. And it's called the Children of Incarcerated Parents Bill of Rights. I have the right to be kept safe and informed at the time of my parents' arrest. I have the right to be heard when decisions are made about me. I have the right to be considered when decisions are made about my parent. I have the right to be well cared for in my parents' absence. I have the right to speak with, see, and touch my parent. I have the right to support as I face my parents' incarceration. I have the right not to be judged, blamed, or labeled because my parent is incarcerated. I have the right to a lifelong relationship with my parent. So unfortunately, 7% of children in our country will experience parental incarceration at one point or another. And nearly 2 times as many Black children will have a parent that lives with them at the time of the arrest go to prison or jail, which is of course even more disruptive. As Kate mentioned, many parents are incarcerated, and many people that are incarcerated are parents. Almost 70% of people that are in state prison have at least one minor child. That's even truer for women. More women that are incarcerated are mothers. And if the mom is incarcerated, the child is more likely to end up in the foster care system. Anecdotally, we see that play out, unfortunately, in our work as well. And I find this pretty staggering that for every person who is in state prison, 1.25 million people in state prison, there are just as many children who has a parent who is in state prison. So when we think about, our mass incarceration problem, it's both an inside bars and an outside of bars problem. And why do I say that? I think, probably a lot of thoughts come to your mind when you think of parental incarceration and what that must be like for the child. And I think that some of those would bear out and be true, which is there are a lot of studies about the mental health and physical health impacts of having a parent who's incarcerated, behavioral problems, educational problems in school for children who have an incarcerated parent. But there are more recent studies, especially since 2016 on, regarding the importance of visitation. And I'm going to call it visits, because visitation can sound sort of negative or has that very legal connotation, which is important when we're in court. But sometimes, that pure ability to visit with a parent can mitigate those negative impacts, especially in-person contact visits, even when the parent is incarcerated. Okay, so some of you are probably going to the space of the but what if space, right? And thinking of all of the parents that you've ever heard of that probably shouldn't see their child again for one reason or another. And just like Kate, I am not saying that those parents don't exist, or there aren't situations in which it is unhealthy for the child to be around their parent or have any further contact with their parent. But I would challenge you to sort of approach it from the stance that generally speaking, leaving the possibility open for parental reunification of some kind, not necessarily full custody, but a relationship between the parent and child is actually beneficial to that child. Another sort of stat that sticks out to me is that a third of, I think it's a third of people in state prison had experienced parental incarceration. So again, we're looking at a cyclical problem, and I think getting to the place of thinking about solutions to the problem, and again, more visitation being, generally speaking, a helpful for the child's development and growth and ability to sort of grow into a fully fledged, healthy adult. In our work, we do take custody and visitation cases for people who are currently incarcerated or are previously incarcerated, and find that it's very important for them to have a voice at the mediation table. And that is in part because mediation is a creative space where families can come up with something that works for them. And the realities of having an incarcerated parent, such as distance to and from the prison, which can be insurmountable for some families. In my previous work in Chicago, we had a fantastic program called Reunification Ride, where a bus full of children would go from Chicago to the women's prisons and get to see their moms. And the joy on their faces, I'm personally witnessed, you can't replace that or mistake that. That was just pure joy to be reconnected with the moms. In South Carolina, we have our women's prisons in Greenwood and Columbia. It can, if you're in Charleston, be difficult, obviously, or again, impossible perhaps to go see the mom in person. Men's prisons, I mean, can similarly be very difficult. That could be placed across the state, but there are more options such that sometimes they can get a transfer to be closer to their family. But there are other ways to stay in touch with children while parents are incarcerated, including phone calls and letters. Letters can be really important. And I have a situation where the parent was sending letters for years and the family had decided that they didn't want to share those letters with the children, understandably. I think families tend to try to make the best decisions that they know how to in the moment. Tragically, that parent is now terminally ill. And so sort of trying to rush that reconnection and family relationship, potentially more traumatic and difficult for the children than it would have been if they were allowed to maintain that relationship over the years. So no judgment there, but those things do happen, and things like letters, even if they're one way and the child can decide whether or not to write back. Phone calls, again, but sort of the great thing about mediation is, I think, if the incarcerated person is there, they can provide information about what is and isn't possible, what is or isn't realistic, right? So if they want to have, let's say, an in-person visit every Tuesday, and that's not realistic at the facility, that they can share that information. And so it can be predictable for the child and predictable for everybody what's actually going to happen. And happy news, I know with COVID, it was pretty much no in-person visitation. That has changed at SCDC. Their visitation policy is up on their website. It's really easy to find. If you have a case where a party's incarcerated and you're thinking about visits or what's possible, do look up the, if they're in SCDC, you can look at their visitation policy, or the local county jail visitation policy should also be publicly available. And so that's information you can access as counsel or as the mediator. And sort of stepping to the, when the person reenters the community, right? And now all of a sudden they have the ability potentially to be an in-person 24/7 parent again. It's not to say that that is always going to happen or what the family is going to decide is best, or oftentimes I will say our clients don't think that's best. So we've had cases where the client is simply seeking visitation with the child, and that can start as phone calls. We've had cases where it's started as a form of reunification counseling with a professional in office before it moves on to any kind of in-person visitation. So it can look a lot of different ways. And again, it's a moment for creativity and sort of thoughtfulness about what it should look like for the family. Sometimes full custody does make sense for somebody that was formerly incarcerated. I had one client who was a formerly incarcerated mother whose child was actually placed by the custodian into a children's home and left there. And now mother has everything together. She's in a really good place, and we were able to help her regain custody of that child. And that, I mean, what a powerful and wonderful moment for that family. They're all reunited under one roof. And again, those kinds of things are possible. And especially I think as, we open our minds to sort of like, especially based on the information that Kate provided, not simplifying the idea of having a criminal record. We also take child support cases. As many of you probably already know, incarceration is still considered voluntary unemployment in the state of South Carolina. There's a federal regulation that says that cannot be the case anymore. We expect that to change here. So watch this space. But unfortunately, there is no way to modify child support based on incarceration. I see a look of shock. So maybe not everybody knew this, but it is a huge problem for our clients who often leave prison with easily more than $20,000 in child support arrears, $50,000. We've seen it all. But I will tell you, even those arrears that are $2,000 from their time in jail can feel insurmountable when they're already facing all of those issues that Kate was mentioning about, job, housing. Okay, so now I also need to immediately start paying back my child support. We work with people who have owed child support from the 1980s to people who have ongoing child support cases. It happens a lot. The child support counselors and the family courts do, I think, really a wonderful job of providing information, and generally will work with folks as they're getting out if they are in communication with the court about, I just was released and I'm trying to get a job and things like that. But there's good data on sort of the fear that those high numbers instill in people. People are more likely to pay smaller debts than these massive amounts. And all too often we see our clients get really, really discouraged. And many of our clients have been incarcerated for failure to pay child support, up to a year in prison, civil contempt. There's no right to an attorney in those cases. So if they don't have us, generally they are going pro se before the court. And the question is whether or not they were able to pay. It's an ability to pay determination to assess whether it was willful non-payment or that they truly could not make the payment. But I mean, we've had clients who are in homeless shelters who are trying to pay on their child support. It can be problematic all around. And their driver's license is now suspended because they're in child support arrears. Technically, failure to pay child support is not supposed to prohibit visitation with a child. So it shouldn't impact visitation. Practically speaking, when somebody is facing jail time potentially, doesn't have their driver's license, those are serious impediments to reconnecting with the child. And I think that we should be concerned about how we handle and deal with those arrears cases. Mediation, again, is a creative space where, or even outside of mediation, we've had some parties make agreements after a party was incarcerated that really helps everybody out so that the custodial parent will receive money, but in a fashion that won't, sort of completely bankrupt and make destitute the non-custodial parent while they work on paying back the arrears. We've seen where, they were willing to give like a 6-month grace period, where they were willing to forgive certain periods of arrears. So I think it doesn't always happen that way, but it's something to watch for. And if there is a mediation case, to not forget that, again, those child support arrears might be sitting out there. It might be very intimidating for the incarcerated party. They know that they're being released to that debt and that they then are again facing that potential jail time. That's something that we get calls about or letters about frequently from SCDC, and people are looking for solutions where they can pay back the money without sort of ending up back in the same cycle that they were already in. I will say, I think that one of the saddest questions that I get that kind of breaks my heart when I hear it is, were my parental rights terminated? Do I have my parental rights? The number of times that incarcerated people or previously incarcerated people have asked me that, it's heartbreaking. I just hope that we can, by including incarcerated people at the table, allow them to know what is going on in their case and their family, in their life, again, as appropriate. So we're hoping that after today, and probably we might be preaching to the choir, and you all already do this and know this and incorporate this into your practice. But please do not assume that mediation is not possible because a party is incarcerated. It is absolutely possible. We have been working with SCDC and the jails, as Zoe, who's wonderful with UMC, has pinpointed these cases where a party is incarcerated to help make sure that they are able to be present virtually for the mediation. COVID has taught us that prisons and jails have these systems. They can do it. They can do WebEx. They can have the person in a room by themselves, and it works, right? And we as lawyers, as mediators, can do Zoom mediation, and it functions for everybody. So on the same line, please don't ask a judge to waive mediation because of incarceration. Again, it's, what is mediation for if not for hearing from all the parties, right? And making sure that everybody is present. Reach out to UMC to schedule mediations when a reentry or incarceration issue is at play. They are just fantastic at handling these particular mediations. There can be, I'm not going to pretend that it's always smooth going with SCDC or the county detention center to get it set up, but they are very good at staying on them and making sure that everything is good to go. So if you know that's an issue in your case, you might want to consider using Upstate Mediation Center for your mediation in that particular case. And just try to stay informed. Like I said, watch this space. We are expecting changes on the child support rule, but I think as more people become aware of the real problem that we have with mass incarceration as a country, but also particular challenges that we face in South Carolina, that we can have more people as sort of informing and assisting in our work in reentry. So thank you very much.
Can we answer any questions for anyone? I know we've thrown a lot at folks. So you may all be grilling or saying, my lunch hour is over, I've gotten my food and I need to go back to my Friday afternoon. But if folks have questions, we're happy to answer.
Yeah, how those last ones, let's get informed to join you guys. So how do we support you guys, or get informed or help y'all out?
We are always looking for volunteers. We are also always looking, if financial support is amazing, volunteer support as whether you're a lawyer or not is hugely helpful. We are the only organization in South Carolina providing specific legal reentry services. And so we could use 25 more lawyers, 10 paralegals. So we have more work than we know what to do with, and would welcome any sort of support on the volunteering front. If you go to rootandrebound.org, which I think Jennifer has the website in the invitation, you can see we have a list of resources there. One of the things that we're working on in South Carolina right now, and Annie, our education expert, is pushing this forward, is putting together what we call the roadmap to reentry, where we take the 11 most common legal issues that we see in reentry and lay that out in chapter form. It's meant to be used kind of as a reference encyclopedia of, I'm getting out and I'm on the sex offender registry. What are my housing options? To be a resource for folks who we may not be able to reach, because there are about 1 million people in South Carolina who have a criminal record. And there are, about 8 of us total here. So we certainly can't help everyone. We do, I know we've got several friends here from South Carolina Legal Services, Charlotte, Kirby, and maybe others. We refer cases to partners whenever we can. But all of us on this civil legal aid front, there's an incredible need. So visit rootandrebound.org. And that will give you an idea of our resources. You can donate through the website. You can contact us through the website if you'd be interested in volunteering in any way.
And specifically, we're really looking for attorneys who want to take parole cases pro bono. We have a large parole pro bono project that we recently launched. So that would be an easy way to get involved quickly if you're interested in parole.
And those are really fun feels like a weird word to use with that, but there's not a lot of law involved in it. It's really going in front of the parole board and telling someone's story, forming a relationship with this person, getting to know them, and then going in front of the parole board and saying, this is why this person should be released, and helping them think through what that might look like. So it's a really impactful way to get involved.
How do you get your referrals? As a guardian ad litem in family court, I deal with a lot of parents who are incarcerated or have these issues. So how do you get referrals? Because as guardian ad litem, I can't go into mediation and advocate. So
I will give an overview, and then Allison can definitely speak more from the family court. Sometimes she is getting, I think, direct family court referrals now. We are located in Triune Mercy Center, which, speaking of community partners, doing amazing work right around the corner here. So we are located there and get a lot of referrals from them. So Tyria, who I mentioned earlier, Jerry Lassingame, they have a 16-bed transitional home for men and for women, and we provide services to all of those folks. We get referrals from SCLS. We get referrals from partners. United Ministry sends us a lot of folks. And so we also have a reentry email hotline. And so people will email us through that as we do more and more work inside the prisons. That network is very strong, and so we hear from a lot of folks that way. You want to speak to the family court specifically?
Sure. I was going to say that generally you can always email one of us directly, and that is perfectly fine. But if you want to just give the person our office phone number, that works great. We have folks answering the phone, and they can schedule an intake for that person. So if that's an easier way to sort of provide that information as a guardian, just Root and Rebound, Greenville office. I don't know if our phone number is on the slide, but I can.
It's not, but our email is, so let me put
Perfect.
that up there.
Yes, they can either email that South Carolina at rootandrebound.org or call our phone number, and we will, if we don't answer, leave a message, we'll schedule an intake and go from there.
And all that information is on our website too, rootandrebound.org. Spell everything out, it's right there.
Yes.
Yeah, question for you. You only deal with adults, or adult statistics that you had up there, were they just for adults? They didn't include the juvenile system?
They did not include the juvenile system, no, sir. I don't believe
This one does, right here, you can see the youth population of 36,000. So that does go into that 1.9 million.
Right.
But There are incredible issues that come up with juveniles, both folks who are currently juveniles in DJJ, or within that, that guardianship system. We also, one of the things Allison was mentioning, our parole project, we, most of the clients through that were convicted as juveniles, oftentimes convicted in the adult prison system. I know Joy's here, she could probably speak from a psychology point of view of why that is so inherently problematic that a 15, 16, 17-year-old brain and what they do. I wouldn't want to be judged by what I had done at 15, 16, or 17, and we're locking people up for life. And so oftentimes the folks who are representing in those cases who have life sentences were sentenced as juveniles. So there are quite a few issues that
And
come in there.
either were resentenced to life with the possibility of parole, so they're up for parole, or they weren't eligible for resentencing because it was already a life with the possibility of parole sentence. That's sort of the cruel irony for the lawyers in the room who are familiar with the Miller line of cases, but that's a whole nother CLE.
That's a whole other CLE, Jeffrey, you have to have us, we have your whole next year of CLE.
Great.
Does that answer your
Yeah, so,
question?
so I know that they have extended the age of the juveniles when it was 18. Now I think it's 21, 22. So do your program work with those older juveniles?
I have parole, so we don't have an age restriction on who we can work with.
Okay.
Generally, we tend to get people that are 30 plus. I think they're feeling those ramifications of the criminal record. Generally, that's when people come to us, but we do work with younger people as well. And in answer to your question, I know there's a big push for sentencing reform in other states where older adolescents are being treated in a different manner. We would love to see that happening here. We do have the Youthful Offender Act. We have some provisions for young adult, but not that same kind of sentencing reform that I think you're speaking to. But we do take parole cases where, like, I mean, I have one that was supposed to be heard this week where he was 18. So technically, you know, he wasn't a kid, but
Right, okay.
he was
Thank you.
pretty much a kid. Yeah.
And I would say along those lines, if there's anyone in the room, who practices criminal law, when I was a prosecutor, I did not understand, and we don't talk about the collateral consequences that come up as a result of a record at all, and we need to do a much better job about teaching our public defenders and solicitors about that. But if you are practicing criminal law and you have a client who's under the age of 25, 26 and may in any way, shape, or form be eligible for the Youthful Offender Act, most of those can be expunged, which opens a huge opportunity for folks that is typically not available in the felony case. So definitely something to think about with your younger clients if they're not in the DJJ system, but in the adult system.
But please impress upon them that they have to stay out of trouble while they're serving the YOA and for 5 years after. That catches people. I really wish we could expunge more wise. A lot of times that messes folks' eligibility up, but it's good to know.
And small things, I mean, a simple possession of marijuana will
Petty stuff.
keep somebody out of that.
I think guardian ad litem work too, and I volunteer with the program that helps children who are, in DSS custody. And I'm just curious how the visitation works with a child that has been taken from their parents and is in foster care or, a custodial situation. Are they the ones responsible to get the child to the visitation? Is it something that's required? Because I've had a lot of DSS cases and there has never been any visitation that I can remember with a parent.
An
that was
incarcerated
currently
parent.
Incarcerated.
I will give you some of my perspective, particularly from the prosecutor's office and how that works, and then Allison can give you a little bit, I don't know if you've had that situation, but so it's so case dependent, right? Like Allison was saying, I had cases where the father was the abuser of the child, right? You're not gonna set up a visitation there. Oftentimes if a child has been removed from someone's custody, there will be a no contact order in place. Much like everything else we've discussed, it's so important to understand what the context there is. If there's been physical or sexual abuse, that's one thing. But we see clients all the time whose child was taken away because the child tested positive for a substance, or the child is found in a home where there's drug paraphernalia. And that I think is a very different situation. So typically, I think what would be, what you would look for as a guardian is, what were the circumstances? Is there a no contact order in place? And then, like Allison was talking about, what is the feasibility of getting the child to the incarcerated parent? And is that going to be and I think this is where the guardian comes in,
Well, that's kind of where my
is that
question
healthy or not? For the
I
child?
haven't seen that happen where there was a DSS involvement while the parent's incarcerated, and I would love to see that. I think a powerful point that I forgot to bring up is that, really children imagine the worst. So and you're like, yes, whatever we think prison is, they imagine it 10 times worse. And so the ability, not even necessarily that they have to go every month or something like that, but the ability to have some kind of visit with the incarcerated is really important. So they see that their parent is still healthy and safe. And maybe that point is a way to advocate for visits in those cases. I haven't heard of that happening, but I would love for it to.
Well, I guess that was kind of my question. Is there some way to make that happen, or a special, like, certain type of visit where children can,
So children can go to carceral facilities, so I think that would have to be in the court order, right, for DSS to then comply and do that. I would think that maybe a DSS caseworker would be the person responsible in that scenario, to take that lift off of the foster parent. I know, I haven't seen it, but I think that that's what I would ask for, would be that the DSS caseworker accompany the minor child to the facility, something like that, and see if you get that in a court order. But especially, I think, our family courts are so good at recognizing when everybody thinks something is in the child's best interest and trying to make it happen. So I think, especially in a case where everybody thinks that that's appropriate, might be the best. And for younger kids too, we didn't even get into sort of the different ways in which different age children experience their parental incarceration is very different. And so for a young child, a phone call is not going to be a great way to stay in touch with mom or dad while they're in county jail. So maybe picking a case where you think this is a good one to test this out and advocating for it.
In the DSS case, they transport children to various, if there's an evaluation that's required, that is not gonna be a foreign concept to them. I think it's more adding in the, and our prisons we have 17 prisons in South Carolina, and they're fairly far flung. So if someone's incarcerated at Perry, which is half an hour from here, but like Allison was saying, if someone's incarcerated in Edgefields, that's a different story that can be difficult. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for your attention and your questions. We are certainly available afterwards if you have a one-on-one question, or always feel free to reach out, email us, stay in touch, because we could use as many people in this fight as we can get.
Thank you so much.